Basalt rock dust is a slow release aluminum silicate mineral that's often used as a soil amendment. It's great at remineralizing soils with calcium, magnesium, silica, and a little bit of micronutrients and trace elements. Basalt isn't conventionally thought of as a fertilizer because it doesn't contain any nitrogen or phosphorus and has very low potassium levels. However, it does contain a high percentage of silica and a good amount of calcium, magnesium, iron, and a small amount of manganese, copper, and zinc. Basalt weather is relatively quick for a silicate rock mineral, but the availability and the release rate from this material is heavily dependent on both biological and environmental weathering and particle size. Basalt will release calcium, magnesium, silica, and trace elements, but it also contains a high percentage of aluminum, so you want to avoid acidic soil conditions that could liberate that aluminum. However, that's not likely to happen simply because basalt also has the ability to slightly raise soil pH with its silica liming effect. It's not effective as an amendment to adjust pH like high calcium ag lime or calcium silica. The nutrient ions in basalt are trapped in a mineral lattice and must be released by that weathering process. So the release of soluble nutrient ions are typically slower than soluble fertilizers, and they're usually slower than a lot of organic meals. And that's why it's really important to get a very fine material, because finer material has a larger surface area and that will weather and release nutrients more efficiently. So soils with higher carbon levels that are biologically active will liberate nutrient ions from basalt more efficiently. And remember, it's always best to use personal protection equipment when mixing very fine, dry, dusty amendments. So basalt can also contain heavy metals, just like so many inputs. And it's always a good idea to test because different sources come from different areas and will have different levels. However, most levels seem to be pretty moderate and not at ranges that are dangerous or potentially toxic. So basalt is a really great amendment, and if your goal is long-term mineral balance and biological support, it's great. It's really good for acidic and sandy soils with low base cation saturation. So that's your base cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and for soils that have low calcium and magnesium reserves or low cation exchange capacity. It's also a great silica bearing mineral, which will release plant available silica over time. However, there are some things to be aware of. If you're dealing with calcareous soils or high pH soils, you may want to hold off from using basalt rock dust in your program until you have reduced pH levels or until you need better calcium and magnesium reserves. It's also important to only use products that have been tested for heavy metal contamination, especially if you're bringing products to market that are being tested for contaminants. Also, if you're dealing with phosphorus limited soils, it may not be a good idea to use the basalt because it can increase the precipitation reactions between calcium and phosphorus or between micronutrients like iron and manganese and phosphorus. And that could lock out both micronutrients and phosphorus. So all in all, it's a really good amendment, but you have to be aware of when you should use it, how much you should use, and why you're using it. Always test organic inputs for heavy metals contaminations and always be aware of the pH conditions that you're applying because that can have a drastic effect on overall quality and yield and the way that that system functions as a whole.